Months to go before a COP29 in Baku this November, all eyes on whether wealthy nations will finally step up on climate finance. But before then, attention turns to the UN Climate Change Bonn Conference taking place from June 3rd to 13th, where countries are expected to make progress on key climate finance discussions. As a key voice in driving momentum, UN Climate Change High-Level Champion Naiga Arpadarai joins us to unpack what's at stake. Naiga, welcome to Power Lunch Southern Africa, and thank you for your time. Now, you've spoken quite a lot about the need for rich countries to honor their climate finance commitments. What is the level of urgency heading into the Bonn mid-year summit, and how much progress has been made since the pledges in Baku?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. First of all, I would like to just remind our viewers what was the outcomes of COP29 and why the climate finance was so important. And looking back to our COPs, there are certain things that are clear for me. First of all, it's that Azerbaijan presidency at COP, Baku COP, in many ways brought a breath of fresh air to the climate process. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, from day one, we were seen as the kind of well-intentioned newcomers to the process, but we were essentially parachuted from outside the traditional climate community and placed directly into the presidency. And this perspective allowed us to approach the task with a fresh eye. And it's important to remember that prior to COP29, this role was widely considered to be a particularly difficult assignment because of the finance discussions. And we were entrusted with this challenge, and which many believed was impossible to achieve. It was extremely challenging year with elections, with wars, with economic crises, with natural disasters, and it was kind of a challenge for multilateral system. But we did it. Historic decisions were made at COP29, and we organized the second largest COP ever to bring countries closer, to bring countries together, and to bridge the differences. So what were the outcomes of COP29? The outcomes were the finance goal. If you remember, it's the 300 billion a year to the developing world by 2035, and scale up wider efforts to reach 1.3 trillion per year. Yes, you may say that it's not enough, but that's and I would agree, but that still is the largest ever commitment within COP process. And as the presidency, from the day first, we tried to have a very simple approach. Our goal was to widen the circle, to widen the consensus, and to bring the agenda as far ahead as possible, to commit to particular breakthroughs by moving from setting to super ambitious goals to committing to particular financial indicators. Another important decisions was made is the Article 6 of Paris Agreement, which is also relevant to the finance discussions. So we made a long overdue breakthrough on UN carbon markets that could reach 1 trillion USD per year by 2050. And there were many other important decisions made, but as I said, it was extremely challenging COP, difficult COP, but we came up with the historic decisions. And now another step comes. How can we make sure that this finance are fairly distributed? And my role is the role of high-level champion. Well, my role was to engage with non-state actors, with private sector, civil society, with cities, subnationals, young people, and the rest. And I think that the biggest impact we made is by making small and medium enterprises as one of the focuses of the climate discussions, because SMEs are the backbone of economy. So when we speak about climate finance, how can we make sure that climate finance is reaching the vulnerable communities, and it's also reaching vulnerable people and businesses particularly. So basically, it was a historic COP, and we have so many things ahead. And our negotiators and the whole team will be in Bonn. We will all be in Bonn as presidency, and we will push forward for this agenda, and we will push forward for all the countries to fulfill their promises.
You've mentioned the new $300 billion target by 2035, which was quite ambitious. Now, given that there's been chronic underdelivery on past finance promises like the $100 billion per year goal, what mechanisms or milestones are being put in place this time around to ensure this isn't just another number?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, each COP comes with its own kind of subject and topics around. And in our case, these historic decisions will stay. And this is something that is relevant to all the regions of the world because the climate change affects everyone. It affects all the regions differently, but it affects everyone. And as the presidency, we hold governments to account for the promises they made in Baku because this was a collective goal and everyone must take ownership of making sure it's delivered. So as the presidency, we are calling them to submit their national plans on how they plan to contribute to the fair shares by mobilizing 300 billion by 2035. And we need to hit early climate finance milestones, including doubling adaptation finance by the end of this year. But basically what we do is we are now in working together with COP30 presidency. We are working together with parties. My team, we are working with non-state actors, with private sector, with philanthropies, as I said. So the main goal now is that how can we make sure that, first of all, we can scale it up to 1.3 trillion. And here we need everyone. We need private sector, we need philanthropies, we need all the other stakeholders. So basically, this is the amount that is needed. And now we are discussing our presidency team negotiators are working and will be working in Bonn with all the parties to bring it closer. And we are also will be working with the private sector and philanthropies and all the other non-state actors to see how they see the climate movement of the future.
You've spoken to the various stakeholders that you see needing to come to the party to ensure success here, because public finance alone won't be enough. What role do you see for private capital in particular, and what policy frameworks or de-risking tools are needed to unlock that investment at scale?
Well, you are so right. The role of the private capital is enormous. And I'm also happy that what we did at COP29, we put private sector at the center of the discussions. We even had the private sector business forum at the center of the blue zone for the first time ever at COP history, because without private sector, you cannot solve all the existing problems. You cannot, not only finance, we need technologies, we need capacity building, we need finance, and it all comes from private sector. So what we need to do, we need to make sure private sector is incentivized. These are, smart people. They want to calculate things. And what we see from climate agenda, sometimes projects are not measurable and not feasible. So we need to kind of have it feasibility, and private sector need to be incentivized for that. So and also what we see whenever we talk to the parties and also non-party stakeholders, when the governments are working on their national plans, on their NDCs as we call them, these are the commitments, they need to do it in close dialogue with the private sector. And then kind of it all works together. So basically, our message is that we are here to engage with everyone. We had historic decisions, but it's not enough. We need to make sure that COP30 is success now. And we need to make sure that everyone is engaged. And we need to make sure that, as I said, that the finance are fairly distributed, that we have justice in this situation, because that it's not only, some wealthy companies of the West benefiting from finance. We need to make sure that SMEs in Africa, SMEs in Asia, SMEs in all parts of the world are understanding the rules, and we have universal rules for everyone, and they can benefit from it. And I think that this is such a universal agenda. The climate change, it's not only moral duty for all of us, it's also something that brings us all together. This is something that we face a common challenge. And we have so many trade wars, we have so many dividing lines, but this is a unifying agenda that we should all embrace. That's my strong belief.
Talking about the trade wars and just unpacking that a little bit more, how are political tensions such as the trade fragmentation we see at the moment or election cycles in key donor countries affecting the climate finance conversation?
Well, as I said, we have our COP, and this was a collective goal that was achieved, and everyone must take ownership of making sure that the promises are delivered. But COP, it's the UN climate process. It's the bigger than a couple of parties. It's a kind of a global challenge. But inside the climate community, I always say that COP as a process. During its many years of history had its ups and downs. It's kind of a roller coaster. It had its ups and downs. There were years when nothing major was happening, but then there were some COPs which came with breakthroughs. So that's something that have always been this way, and it will always stay like that. So are we ever going to have the COP process which will be stable and ascending process from one year to another? No, it's never going to happen because there are political turmoils, there are elections, there are trade wars happening every year. And it was like that, it will be like that. But climate movement has its inbuilt advantage, which is its universality of the cause. And the idea that we have to come up with universal standards that we will all voluntarily adopt as nations and make changes to ourselves in order to promote more sustainable and responsible way of living is a great alternative to what is happening in the world. And we always say that, for example, what is better, to have a global consensus or to have trade wars? What is better, to have difficult negotiations at COPs or have military conflicts? From this point of view, climate change agenda has this huge internal potential that will never go away. But it also doesn't mean that it will come automatically, because as we said earlier, so it's easy to turn a healthy climate change dialogue and negotiations into fight of self-interest and ideologies. And it's easy to alienate some nations and continents out of it. So I always keep saying that the future COP and wider climate movement depends on the ability of this movement to understand global context and on the ability to widen the consensus and to bringing into the process the new stakeholders. And instead of pushing this agenda on small countries, by making small countries incentivized to take part in it. So by bringing private sector, not only big companies from the West, but also, as I said, SMEs from all the parts of the world. We need also technologies. We need untapping potential, including individual talent. And by the way, this is something we also did. We had our Impact Makers campaign at COP, where we've been looking for people contributing to climate change, to climate movement, doing some startups, some projects. So basically, it's a very, very wide discussions, but definitely the climate change agenda is not about ideologies. It's not about moralization. It's about solidarity and cooperation.
Right, Niga, that's all we have time for. Thank you once again for taking the time to speak to us today. That was Niga Arpadarai, UN Climate Change High Level Champion, COP29.